Right, let's go live now to Parliament, of course, where MPs have been listening to the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, giving his response to the State of the Nation address. Our reporter, Athi Mtongana, there, monitoring reaction as well. Athi, good afternoon to you. What are people saying there?
Well, let's get reaction from the official opposition party, which was actually mentioned by the president, of course, touching on the criticism that he has received from opposition benches and, of course, the issue of the declaration of the national state of disaster, the chief whip of the Democratic Alliance. But we've heard how the ANC has come out to say that the DA has somehow changed its stance insofar as calling for the national state of disaster. Talk to us about that and what that actually means.
Look, Athi, I think the DA has been quite clear that our view here is that if you're going to deal with the crisis of Eskom, or at least the energy crisis in the country, then you've got to have targeted interventions and not a blanket state of emergency as we are seeing now.
But what did you call for initially?
Well, what we called for we called for a state of disaster that would specifically deal with Eskom and the energy crisis. Because our problem, Athi, is that even departments that don't have anything to do with the energy crisis are now going to be able to utilize eased up procurement processes, eased regulations, and we have PTSD, quite frankly, as a country.
Didn't the president say the national state of disaster? This, of course, you will clarify. Didn't he say it's particularly to deal with the energy crisis and hence even now the appointment of an electricity minister?
I think that the president has completely missed the mood of the country when it comes to, in particular, the appointment of the minister. I think people have been incredibly clear that there are now 3 ministers that are involved in the energy crisis. The 2 that are Gwede Mantashe and Pravin Gordhan, but there's also now a cocktail minister who's in the mix for a national state of disaster. And no, Athi, unfortunately, the president, while he's saying that the declaration of the state of disaster is to deal with the energy crisis, but the problem is that once you activate the state of the Disaster Management Act, what you've allowed to do is you've allowed processes to be opened up, regulations to be eased, like we saw during the COVID-19.
How did you imagine it to be like then?
We imagined it to that the state would essentially only focus its targeted interventions on Eskom, the energy crisis, looking at the Department of Mineral Resources, looking also at the Department of Public Enterprises, and not necessarily a blanket approach. And again, on the issue around the president tried very much to explain what the electricity minister would be doing. And our view is that if ministers do not perform, then you've got to fire them. You've got to get rid of ministers who do not perform. What you cannot do is just simply add on to layers and layers of the executive and have your presidency, which has become a super presidency, without a portfolio committee, no oversight in parliament. But again, now an additional person has been put in charge of this crisis. I don't see how this is going to work. What we've known and what we've called for is that there are massive interventions that need to be done at Eskom, particularly some of what the president mentioned about breaking up Eskom, unbundling Eskom and bringing IPPs on board.
Quickly, before I let you go, the ATM has called on Parliament to establish a committee that would play an oversight role directly with regards to the president. And if I remember correctly, those were part of the Zondo recommendations. What do you have to say to that?
Absolutely. We have definitely been pushing for this particular matter in the Rules Committee. We think it's a long overdue. The president, and particularly the presidency now, especially under President Ramaphosa, has really ballooned. And there are task teams. There are now ministers that are in the presidency that all need to have accountability and oversight in Parliament. So we definitely support that.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. The chief whip of the official opposition party, Siviwe Kwakube. Also to note that today the EFA parliamentary caucus was not present during President Cyril Ramaphosa's reply. It's also important to note that the president also criticized the opposition for not being able to come up with solutions around the issues and the challenges that face the country. I'd like us to listen to what the president had to say when he hit back on the opposition.
Athi Mtongana, we'll have to listen to that a little later. Thank you very much indeed for your update. Do appreciate that. More reaction, of course, to come from the president, but he did suggest that opposition parties were being bound by their political affiliation rather than looking at the national problems as a whole. Well,